Hello everybody, Dokkan Assets here. Today we are back with another animation analysis video. Man, I did not think we were going to be doing this many animation analysis videos, but we've just had new units coming out left and right. Then it's only natural that we make a animation analysis video going over each and every one of them. And of course, we're going to be talking about the brand new LR from Battlefield that you can obtain with the Battlefield rewards, of course, that being LR HATCHIYACK. Now, really cool that we're even getting any new kind of unit for this guy, because of course, this guy is not only kind of like a forgotten Dragon Ball character, I would say. I don't really see a lot of people talk about this guy a lot. Not only that, he's also sort of an obscure character, right? Obviously only appearing in specials and a few Dragon Ball video games and the like. Of course, he isn't really the most well-known or, I guess, popular character, but nonetheless, he's really cool. I think his design is super sick, and it's awesome to see him actually get some love here. So today, we are going to go over his brand new LR, and I actually have a couple little things for you throughout the video here as well. Before we get started, I do want you to note, I am not a professional, right? I am not a professional when it comes to animation. I'm just somebody who looks at the assets of Dokkan all the time. I watch Dokkan animations all the time. So I think I got a little bit of knowledge in my head when it comes to talking about Dokkan animations. But keep in mind, these videos are just for fun, right? Now, with that all being said, I know one thing that a lot of you have asked when it comes to these animation analysis videos is for me to have reference material when it comes to some of these animations. When there may be scenes that I take at it, a look at it, and I go, I don't really like that. But it turns out that that is just exactly how the anime was, and Dokkan is just trying to be as accurate to the source material as possible. I know sometimes I get some comments about that, and people also just saying, hey, it would be nice if you had the original references on hand. Well, this time, and hopefully going forward we will, obviously sometimes it's hard to get that like right when a unit drops and then making that video, right? Sometimes it's not always the easiest thing to obtain. But for this time around, I actually was able to find a video from iKevinX, which I've actually seen a little bit of his stuff before. So thank you to him for allowing me to use his video as sort of a reference in our video here today. We will be able to get some of the original source material right next to the Dokkan animations for this one. And, of course, if you'd like to check out this full video, and please do, because it is really cool, and there is a lot of stuff in here that they take from some really old Dragon Ball material. You can tell by how aged this is, right? Obviously, these really old Dragon Ball video games, I believe the Famicom, or the Famicom, rather, I guess would be more technically how you pronounce it, is where HATCHIYACK originally debuted, and I think he was in an arcade game, if my Dragon Ball game memory serves correctly. And that's where these animations are actually taken from, the OVA that is within those games and like the cutscenes and whatnot. So yeah, super cool that they pulled out this really old material to get a bunch more for this guy, because obviously, right, his like source that he comes from in terms of like the plan to eradicate the Saiyans is really short. So of course there really isn't like a crazy amount of material to make him an LR. So the fact that they ripped some of this really old material was really cool to see. So let's go ahead and get into it here. Of course, as per usual, we're going to watch the animations one time through at regular speed, and then of course we will watch them then at the slow-mo, breaking it down. Now, I will tell you, I do think before we get into any of the animations here, I should know, I honestly think that his untransformed 12 key is probably his worst animation out of all of them. I don't even think it's that bad, to be honest with you, but I definitely think from the 12 key, it only goes up in animation, which I think is really, really cool, and honestly awesome that this basically just keeps getting better and better, all things considered, right? His 18 key especially is super sick. I cannot wait until we get to talk about that. Even his 12 key is really cool. And by the way, his card art, I have to say, is very, very nice. I quite like everything that they did with this guy. Honestly, it's pretty good. This is definitely like one of the best Battlefield awards, I think, in terms of the animations. Dude, look at this 18 key, bro. They popped up with my man. Look at this shot here. Oh my gosh, the lights, bro. Don't worry, we'll talk about it in more detail. This shot here, oh, I adore it. It's so good. It's so nice to see this man get some love. I really, really like this guy's animations. And of course, this is a great ape transformation. That's why you have this little at the end here. Even though, interestingly enough, this is a active skill. That's why he has an OST, right? Because this transformation, even though it is a great ape transformation, is put on by the active skill, even though he doesn't have any voice lines, which I will say is kind of a shame, just because I don't know where else I would talk about this, so we may as well talk about it here. It is kind of a shame that he doesn't have any voice lines, but this is more of a thing where they're using the active skill as a mechanic to get you to be able to use the giant transformation whenever you want, rather than an actual active skill or like a traditional active skill. I guess they definitely still could have given him voice lines, like even if it was just him roaring or something like that, as you know, he's getting big. But still, this is more like using the mechanic instead of like an actual active skill, if that makes sense in the animation department anyway. Okay, so let's go ahead and tune in to the 12 key now. Of course, the untransformed. First of all, this starting shot here is really, really nice. There are a couple of things in here that I will say, and it is mostly like this 12 key super that are really the only things that I even just have some little nitpicky problems with, right? There are a couple of little jump cuts. Overall, I think these are actually very good. But like, here, when he opens his hand, right, it is definitely a very big cut to him just going, right, with it being open, right? If we take a look back here at the original source material, obviously, you know, he just opens his hand more naturally. I suppose it is more of a thing of like he kind of opens it quickly there, or it's almost like twisting it, right? But nonetheless, obviously, right, that's like kind of nitpicky. So, you know, I mean, you know, take it with a grain of salt, of course. But we have HATCHIYACK close his hand here, which even though this is like a fade of an asset here, which usually I'm not a fan of, I do kind of like how quick this is, because obviously this is sort of like, oh, he's serious, you know, like he's not messing around, right? He's ready to throw down. So I kind of like that actually, in this case specifically, right? This did catch me a little bit off guard, I will admit, when they had the face, right? Like the big zoom in close up here of him turning with this sort of like the ghosting effect. It did kind of catch me off guard the first time that I watched it. I don't know if most people will notice this or not, but I know, like, looking at these little details all the time, you start to catch this stuff. I know for some of you guys even, I've gotten a couple of comments saying that you watch the animation analysis videos and you start to pick up on stuff like this, which is very good, but then also very bad, because you then tend to notice the things that bother you a little bit more, you know? But nonetheless, this was a little bit trippy. I do like this shot, though. Obviously, this is a very nice, high-quality looking asset. It's just a little bit of a shame that they used the fade and not just, like, had him actually turn his head there. But nonetheless, though, so these shots, I will say, right? This whole sequence here basically is kind of the same problem for me. They have this little bit of minimal movement, which I think they do a good job with, right? Like you can see that HATCHIYACK's arm actually moves there a little bit. You know, his legs move after he gives this quick kick, right? His body is actually moving, which is good, right? By the way, I do have to say the background looks fantastic. They nailed the sort of ambiance of this animation, I feel like. They definitely did a good job with it. However, for me, it feels like that these punches definitely don't have a lot of impact to them. They kind of try and like give you that effect by having the asset sort of zoom in and blurred and then hit the enemy. This could also be a fact of like the enemy sprite doesn't really have a lot of animation when it recoils. Really all they can do is shake it and then kind of have it just like fly away off the screen, right? Or just have it sit there, right? Here would be a good example of it flying off the screen, right? That could also be sort of a little bit of a issue with just, you know, the sprites being the sprites as per usual. But I do think that these punches and kicks don't really have a ton of impact, especially with that little effect there. Let's see, how does this look in the actual animation? Yeah, you can see that when it comes to the actual like punch and kick here, let's actually slow this down so it's a little bit easier to kind of catch this here. When it comes to the punch, right, it is definitely a lot more motion behind it, right? Not only do you have, obviously, with the original anime, you have the wind-up shot there, right, for those just couple of frames, right, where he actually, like, you know, punches towards the screen, basically. They don't have that in the Dokkan animation, which would have been cool to see. They do animations like that sometimes. But obviously with him punching here, right, there's obviously a little bit of him actually following through with the punch. And of course, the enemy is reacting appropriately, right? Obviously, Vegeta is sort of like moving a little bit in recoil with that. But yeah, and then of course with the kick here, right, obviously it's a very quick scene, but that one maybe not so much because obviously it's on the screen for like maybe seconds. But you understand my point, I think, with the punches and kicks there not really having a lot of impact. This shot looks pretty good. I do like the quick smirk from HATCHIYACK. It is quite funny. The card art, again, super gas. Definitely love what they did with that. Looks super fantastic. Yeah, so the clones of HATCHIYACK. This scene is really cool. I like that basically all of these guys are different assets, right? They definitely could have just repeated this over and over and over. But as you can see here, right, these are all different ones. Even these two, right, his arms look a little bit farther apart than his arms do there. And if we look at the original source material for this, I did want to note, I believe they actually, let me see, because I know that they referenced the clones there. Yeah, this is like, look how anime accurate this is compared to the original source material, right? There's obviously some things that are a little bit different here, like this pose isn't exactly the same as this one, but you can see, right? Like this guy's legs, it looks a little bit awkward with this because you can see the top half of him, but here, right, you see the bottom half of the legs are in the same shape, right? You see this HATCHIYACK's pose is the same. Obviously the back of this guy's head is the same, right? Even this little HATCHIYACK right here is like the same pose here. You can see the one that's sort of stanced up in the background looking like Hercules is even in the same pose here. Of course, they did add a couple more to sort of like fill it out a little bit more, but it's really cool to see how awesome Dokkan does with the anime accuracy when it comes to these little things, right? They definitely do a good job with this, and they all have a little bit of minimal movement too, which is nice that they're not just sprites standing there, right? You do have the different HATCHIYACKs hitch him around, get it? HATCHIYACK, haha, funny. But I will say these also don't really feel like they have a ton of impact either, if I'm being honest. Even though, excuse me, is what I meant to say, right? This HATCHIYACK does have some movement when he kind of approaches. It is basically just like 2 frames, right? You have him like this, right? And then bam, punching down, and that's basically it, with just the sprite moving off screen, and then HATCHIYACK himself, right, kind of moving a little bit. You can see his legs do move a little bit. And then you have this one, which again is basically just like they slide the PNG downward, right? And then they have him fly down a little bit. They do move the arm a small bit. I would actually like to see, how does that look in the original version, right? Let's see. He flies forward. Interesting. So they didn't actually include that. Yeah, so it's like a full follow-through punch rather than just the, you know, the 1-2 quick there. And then with the other one, ooh, wow. Okay, so interesting. They didn't include this part where he hits him down and then he like screams like that. Interesting. I guess that is, though, obviously the newer version of the HATCHIYACK special. They, you know, used some stuff from the original and then obviously changed it up a little bit. But in the original, obviously, he just kind of hits him down. Very interesting. But yeah, both of those punches and kicks, right, in the first section and this one, I just felt like didn't really have a ton of impact, right? And you can see, especially compared to the original animation, they most certainly don't. So that's definitely a little bit of Dokkan's out. But again, like I said in the beginning of this video, I definitely think that this is like probably the worst animation that he has out of all of them. Like, I think it only gets better from here. Like, this is really the only animation that I had some specific problems with. This is really cool, though. They do a really good job of having HATCHIYACK land on the ground and obviously have him feel like he's, you know, like recoiling and taking the weight of the actual, like, you know, fall, right? Which I think is really cool. You have a little bit of minimal movement, and of course, he grabs Gohan here, bringing him up in the air. It is kind of unfortunate because, again, this is a little bit of an L on the sprite department, right? Look how he's holding him here. This is just really awkward, but again, this is not the fault of the animation, excuse me. It's just the fault of the very jank sprite. And then I'm sure that they have him, like, go so quickly up in the air because obviously it would be really weird holding the sprite, you know, with this animation being like that, right? With the original, right, with him landing, obviously, you know, when he grabs him like this, right, it's like a full follow through of him actually lifting him up, and Dokkan, you see it just cuts to them up at the top there. But I'd kind of have to guess that the reason why they did that is because, like I said, with the sprite, I don't know if they could necessarily get it, like, moving with him. Maybe they could, but maybe they just decided to cut it. And again, when it comes to free units, I feel like with their, I don't know if you call it not as hype or lesser animations, like especially if it's a free unit with a transformation and then more animations after that, they always put more effort into those. So it makes sense to me that the 12 key isn't necessarily as crazy. But yeah, this section is really good, excuse me. I think this looks so good where he slams Gohan down into the ground here, right? The actual slam itself has some really good follow through to it, right? It actually feels super impactful. You see him sort of bring his body forward a little bit before he actually slams Gohan down. And again, this is a good spot to actually have it cut super quickly to him actually throwing him down, right? Rather than when the raise, it would have felt a lot more natural for him to actually raise him up all the way. Having him be slammed down so quickly is great to obviously show the impact. The rocks here are super nice looking, right? They obviously match the ground that is sort of exploding under the weight of HATCHIYACK slamming Gohan into the ground. And the smoke effect also looks really, really nice here. I even love these little, like, slight, I don't even know what you call these, just like dust clouds within the smoke there, right? I think those look really cool too. It's nice that they even bothered to include those sort of details. Okay, so then we have funny HATCHIYACK running, which kind of reminds me of that gif of Broly running forward on Namek. But yeah, the running sequence looks pretty good. It is a little bit weird, I will say. It looks like just kind of a little bit funny, I guess. I mean, it looks funny in general, but I feel like they could have maybe added a couple more frames in there. It doesn't look too bad, but you can kind of see, like, HATCHIYACK's legs, like, move very quickly, right? Like, there's not a lot of, like, follow through on each sort of step, I guess you would say. Even his arms moving from side to side, right? Like this to this. I feel like there should be a little bit more in between that, personally, with the actual, like, running there. Let's see, with the original, we obviously have him running, and yeah, you can see it looks like a little bit more fluid. They even are doing this sort of slow-mo effect with the original, which is interesting, that they don't try and do that here. I don't even think that's what they're trying to emulate here, because I know they sort of tried to do that with Jackie Chun, and I feel like they did a little bit of a better job with that. But this, my man's just coming full speed. My man's just going for it. Now, obviously, you've seen it a couple of times when we've been referencing the original animations of HATCHIYACK slamming his head into the enemy here, right? Obviously, literally, after the running animation, you see he does it right there to Piccolo, right? With him basically bashing skulls with my man. Unfortunately, this was kind of the same problem that I had with... who was it that did it? Gamma 1? Yeah, Gamma 1. I was trying to think if it was Gamma 1 or Gamma 2. Yeah, Gamma 1, because Gamma 1 is the one who headbutts Gohan in the movie. With this animation, I don't even really think that this is Dokkan's, like, L on this one. I think this is definitely more just, like, the sprites and the way that the game works, because it's really hard to get a close-up headbutt shot like this with not only how low quality the enemy sprites are, right? But because of the angle that they use, and obviously for this, like, he doesn't really lean his head forward. Like with Gamma 1, he leaned his head forward a little bit. In this original shot that we saw too, he kind of leaned his head forward like a tiny bit against Piccolo here, right? Obviously, like, not too much at the end. I swear he did it in the beginning. Hold on, let me look again. Let's just make sure. Yeah, you can see there, right? He leans his head forward. Let me go right to the scene. There we go. He brings it forward like just a tiny bit, like from the way that his eyebrows come into the shot, right? It looks like his head moves just a slight amount, right? Which isn't too crazy. But obviously the shot isn't this close up. And again, right, with how low quality these enemy sprites are, it's interesting that they didn't use Piccolo for this, but I guess it's because they're combining this small attack with a bunch of other attacks to make up this animation, right? With how low quality the enemy sprite is, it's hard to get a good shot like this. That may even be why they have this a little bit more zoomed out than the original, because could you imagine looking at that zoomed in of the sprite, like how bad this already looks? I could not imagine how yucky that would look. Looking at those 2 pixels on the screen as HATCHIYACK slams his cranium into him. It is cool to see, too, that they even kind of updated the effects a little bit because they have these glowing yellow lines. And obviously here in the original, you also have these little yellow lines that are sort of the impact frame of that. I think that is pretty neat for sure. And, of course, the little effect of him hitting it. But, yeah, this shot, I will say here, this shot of him turning is a little bit strange. Going from this to this so rapidly, right? Obviously, the enemy fades off, and then he grows a little bit, and then they turn. I think that this is a little bit jarring just because obviously the shading changes quite a bit here. And obviously the angle is so drastic. I wish they would have had him turning his head a little bit, right? But this shot here is super sick. I really like the way that they executed this, right? With all of this flurry of punches hitting the enemy. Of course, you know, how could I not mention, you know, this kind of looks like JoJo, if I'm being honest with you. This definitely looks like an Oda barrage. Very, very nice looking, though. I love the way that they did this, right? The super quick punches, the motion lines on all the fists. Obviously, as well, too, you have sometimes multiple fists in the frame, and they really blur them and kind of darken them a little bit to really give you that sort of effect at how fast they're moving and how rapidly they're punching, right? And even with these kind of older looking effects of the fist hitting, I think they work well with how fast everything is going here. Definitely a very good job on that sequence. And then this sequence actually looks really good, I'm gonna be honest with you. I really like how they did this with him. First of all, he looks kind of goofy in his squatted up pose, but with this, right, the way that they have his fists sort of blur, it almost kind of looks like they're vibrating. It kind of reminds me of like a bug's wings almost in the way that he moves, right? And like the different faded assets here, I think work well for how fast HATCHIYACK is moving and how fast he's just absolutely giving the beatdown, right? Very well executed. I want to see actually, how does this look in the original, unless they just don't. Yeah, okay, so in the original there is a little bit more of a different angle on the punches, right? They're all kind of coming in, but that's obviously hard to do because, of course, since it's just the sprite, they kind of have to focus on the middle of the screen for that, right? And then this is interesting because he's fighting multiple whoa, Piccolo. He's fighting multiple people in this shot, so I think that them kind of referencing this and using them in a little bit of a different way is pretty cool for sure. Goku stunned out of his mind. And obviously we have this nice wind up for the punch here, right? Even they nailed these effects, right? They have that right there, right? With the original punch. Oh, no, okay, they don't have that in the background. Interesting. But that is a cool way to sort of emphasize it, right? Like, that is nice to see that in some regards, Dokkan kind of, I don't want to say like ad-libs it a little bit because I don't think that's the right way to do it, but they use some Dokkan-esque effects to still make it feel like a Dokkan animation while still referencing the original source material very well, right? But this punch is super well executed, right? And great use of the impact frame here. Obviously, they don't show the whole windup, but they have this white flash with the fist already kind of in your face, which is a great way to sort of mask them not having the punch follow all the way through. Obviously, the sort of motion blur on the punch as well looks really good. We have the impact frames here as the enemy falls away and cracks into the wall. We then have the card art and hydration break. Hydrate or dihydrate. Now, this is super cool, I have to say. Let's talk about this real quick. First of all, this shot that they did, the black and white of HATCHIYACK sort of coming in here, and then the black dissipates to show the full super HATCHIYACK, looks super sick. I do believe in the original anime here, let me see. This is smoke, which is interesting that they do it this way of him sort of like, I guess you would just say appearing on the scene, right? I don't even know what to call this. I guess just sort of coming out of the light, right? It's interesting that they didn't just do smoke, but I guess it's because obviously with this animation, the beginning part of this is him punching Vegeta into a wall. So obviously it wouldn't really make sense for the smoke to be there. So they kind of, you know, spin it in their own way so it's still a reference to the original while also, you know, kind of keeping true to the flow of how the Dokkan animation has gone already. The other thing that I wanted to note that is interesting about this card, right, is that this is obviously Super HATCHIYACK, right? If you're unfamiliar, HATCHIYACK, obviously the regular one, looks like this, right? Which is what we've seen the whole time and what we'll continue to see for the animation. But This card, and I believe the only Super HATCHIYACK in the game, is this one, right? Which is the Dokkan Awakening, actually, of that other card that we just saw. And this guy, obviously, is a little bit different looking than this one, right? I mean, it's not a crazy one, but basically he just grows a bunch of these extra, like, green parts. And, of course, you know, he gets the big, like, fins, and his gauntlets get a little bit bigger, a little bit sharper, and he looks more like a Gundam like this. But it's very interesting that in this animation, right, they include Super HATCHIYACK here, when this card is not a Super HATCHIYACK card, right? Like, he doesn't transform into Super HATCHIYACK. It's a giant transformation, right? It's just when he grows big, when he's fighting the Z Fighters. So it's interesting that they even bothered to include this at all. And what's interesting, too, is at least if we're looking at the original here too, right, you can see the reason why they did this is because during this scene, right, obviously this is when Super HATCHIYACK appears, but it's interesting that they don't actually use Super HATCHIYACK's, like, attack for this, right? They sort of use the attack that regular HATCHIYACK does. I just think it's something really interesting to note with what they decided to do and, like, the direction that they decided to take these animations. I think that that's a really interesting thing. And again, it's sort of this thing where, like, Dokkan is taking the original source material and using it so it's still a good representation of the original while also still making it make sense in the context of Dokkan, which I think is really cool. This attack looks really good, by the way. This is just the beginning of all these glowy bits of HATCHIYACK looking fantastic. By the way, this looks so good with this little white effect sort of emanating off of the glowing bits that HATCHIYACK has here, right? All the glows just look so fantastic, and the lighting effects on him also look great with his body being a little bit brighter on the front. They absolutely nailed this section for sure. You have the little beam, which again, anime accurate, and then of course the explosion, which you saw moments ago, you know, looks just like how it does in the anime. And I like these little mushroom clouds too. I think that they do a pretty good, or little like balls, I guess. I don't know what you would call them, because the mushroom cloud is more like an atom bomb sort of look. Okay, now we have the transformation animation, which I will say this animation isn't anything too crazy. It's pretty short. It's pretty sweet, right? It does not linger for very long. It is a great ape transformation, so it makes sense to me why it's not a very long animation and why he basically just grows. I think they do a good job of giving you the perspective on this, though, because obviously this shot here, you're like, wow, this man is absolutely a great ape, or more like a giant transformation. Usually, I always call the giant transformation great ape just because I'm so used to, like, calling it that in the context of Dokkan, because that's what I just called it for so long. But it is interesting. I do feel like with this one, they were kind of lacking a little bit on it, right? Like, it's the same pose and it references the original fairly well. And they do a good job with these, like, lines, right? Obviously, that sort of the outline of him begins to glow. But it is definitely more like an actual glow rather than just him turning white. And not to mention here, it is kind of a shame. I guess it's just because they have this cut in the middle in the original. But he literally just, bop, he's white now. You know? It's like, I kind of wish that they would have had it, like, fade in, maybe, and sort of, like, take him over with a little bit of a glow rather than it just appearing there. Because obviously you can see here, you know, it just cuts to him being here. The growing isn't too bad, right? It is pretty faithful to the original, to be honest, because it does kind of like stagnate in the way that it like grows and grows. There is one big jump here though that is pretty noticeable, where you can tell, right, it's the smaller asset getting bigger, then transitioning into the bigger one. And it is kind of a shame that like it's only for this little bit that they have this sort of effect where he's like half glowing, right, and you can kind of see his body a little bit, but they do a good job of them bringing it in towards the end here with the outline still being present, and then obviously this. And it's interesting, they have this transition here, which they do a really good job of using this as a transition, where the glow from the green section on HATCHIYACK covers the screen here, right, and then distracts you with the scene change to then go to the scene of him towering over everybody here, right? Which is a really great way to transition in between these scenes, right? So even though I think that beginning part is a little bit I think that the final part and the execution of it is pretty well done. Okay, so now we get into the real fun stuff. Now we're getting into the 12 key animation here. First of all, this close-up of HATCHIYACK is very nice. Good asset quality. Of course, we have the nice glowing eyes as well. I like the emphasis with, of course, the sort of anime speed lines there. You have a flash of white. This is a really quick appearance of the card art. Holy cow, that came real quick in the animation. You have the card art appear, and you have HATCHIYACK lift his head, right, to then smash it into Goku here, which I will say, even though this is a little bit janky looking, and I think it kind of reminds you of before where his pose changed super quickly, I think especially for the second half when he slams his head down, it works really well because obviously it's that quick snappy movement. But I feel like it doesn't look as bad in this context of him lifting his head up when he's going, you know? I think that it kind of makes a little bit more sense to kind of cut the animation there, if I'm being honest with you, right? It is also cool that this is like a direct reference with this close-up shot. It's not even something Dokkan is ad-libbing here. So yeah, because like even so, right, it's interesting to see as well the different angles that Dokkan takes for this, right? Like this is definitely pulled out a lot more than it is in the original here, right? With how far away it is compared to how close up it is. I do think this closeness also may be something with the original footage and like the way that it was displayed through the game, but nonetheless you can tell that the shot is still a lot more close up. But yeah, he does kind of lift his head in sort of a similar fashion here too, even, where you can see, right, like in the beginning his head is sort of down and then he quickly moves it up like this. And even that, I mean, I don't know if they were really that attention to detail, but it must be because that does seem exactly like what's happening here, right? It is just kind of a shame that it isn't so much of a close-up shot as the original, but again, that might also be because of the sprite, because, I mean, could you imagine how stinky the sprite would look that close-up? I mean, that's basically how stinky it looked when he headbutted him before, right? Look how close-up that was and how kind of yucky that looks, for sure. As unfortunate as that is. Okay, so after the headbutt ensues, right, which looks very, very nice with the follow-through here, you have this, which I will say this is definitely a little bit choppy, right? I kind of wish they would have added in some in-between frames here for sure, of him basically, like, lifting his hand up here, right, like, sort of winding it back. That is a little bit of, like, a yikes, but it's nothing too crazy. It's interesting as well, too, that they have him, like, lift up his hand like this, but his arm, or his leg, rather, excuse me, is also, like, pulled back, and then they zoom in on the leg, because you would think that they would zoom in on the arm there, because obviously that's kind of what it looks like he's going to use to attack next, but no, they cut from him pulling his hand back, and his arm, too, to be... Why do I keep saying that's his arm? I'm mixing up my body parts for some reason, bro. Someone give a bonk to my brain, please. He's pulling back his leg, right? And then they focus on it, which I really like this zoom. I think they do a very good job of sort of like making you really feel like, not like it's 3D, but like it's really kind of coming at you here, right? Is that what they do in the original? Let's see, where he cocks his hand back, right? And then he brings his leg forward. No, okay, it just cuts to his leg. Interesting. So that's a little bit of ad-libbing on Dokkan's part, it seems. That is quite interesting. It's interesting that they even had him pull his hand back at all then, because you would think that, you know, that wouldn't be the case. But I guess that's supposed to be for this section here, you know, when then his fist flies forward. But he also pulled back his other fist? And not this one? Interesting. That's definitely a little bit of weird. Maybe that's a little bit of an oversight. I'm not too sure. But nonetheless, obviously, then we cut to him sliding into frame. I do wish this was a little bit more like him actually like really sliding into the frame. Because as you can see, right, in the original animation here, when he comes into frame, he like really sort of like, it's them trying to emulate how quickly he's moving here, right, with him like sort of really kind of blurring and sliding into the frame, rather than with the way that they did it in Dokkan, where the PNG just sort of like slides in. This would be actually a good place to use the asset fading to sort of emulate that original animation. But nonetheless, obviously HATCHIYACK looks good, and I think the fist coming in from off screen does look pretty good as well. It is nice with this one too. I like when they linger on these punches a little bit. I think it's pretty cool, where they have it like hit, and then the screen shakes a little bit, and the enemy's just sort of caught up in it for a little bit, right? And then they have them fly off, because usually the follow-up for these is always really good, which is the case here, right? The fist actually punching forward definitely has some nice follow-through. It's interesting as well, I don't know if you catch it, because it is kind of hard to notice, but they have you quickly turn this asset here, which is kind of hard to notice, because obviously your attention is so, you know, like, engulfed by the punch. But it's interesting that they turn the angle there at all, because I feel like it kind of doesn't make as much sense, because it would make more sense to have the gem stay on the top with how the next shot is, but then they have him twist his fist. Kind of interesting there for sure. But obviously we have the speed lines. You can tell this is a little bit of a lower quality asset too, because of these thicker black lines, right? Like a lot of the time with the higher quality assets, they have a lot more thinner lines to them like this. But this tends to be how like some of the sprites look and how some of the story assets look when like the characters are just talking to each other in the stories, right? In the Dokkan story events. But yeah, you have this punch here, which is pretty nice. Definitely a very interesting angle here too, and obviously the very nice anime speed lines. It's interesting that they didn't make this a little bit more detailed, and it's kind of simplistic looking. We have the crack against the wall here. I do want to see, is this the same animation as Vegeta hitting the wall? I don't think it is. Let's see, where was that? That was for right here, right? No, that is definitely a little bit different, because he hits it a little bit lower, and the rocks kind of exploding off of it look a little bit different. Yeah, okay. I was just curious to see if they reused that. It does kind of look like it's almost zoomed out a little bit, but it's definitely a little bit of a different shot. Okay, so now, funny enough, this almost kind of feels like it was a, this was where the shot was going before. But yeah, we have HATCHIYACK pull back his fist again. I kind of wish there was a little bit more in-between frames with this one and this one. I feel like this is something that sometimes a lot of the free-to-play units do, where they'll cut those in-between frames sometimes. Sometimes the Dokkan Fest students do it too, but I feel like I see it more commonly in the free-to-play units sometimes. We have the fist fly forward, which I think this shot is very nice. I love the way that they focus on the fist here, right? Where it goes real close and real fast towards the camera. I like that quite a bit. And then obviously we have it come down and crush Goku. This explosion effect looks absolutely fantastic. I love the way that the rocks fly out here. And I love these sort of dust and smoke effects that they have flying off of this here too. Looks really, really nice, if I do say so myself. And the speed line sort of emphasizing it, even though that's sort of like the end of the animation. It makes it feel quite impactful. Oh, I'm so excited, bro. I'm so excited to talk about this one. Oh, this is what I've been waiting to talk about the entire time, bro. It's so good. Okay, let me take a quick drink of water before we get in here. Of course, hydrate or dihydrate, ladies and gentlemen. Make sure you're drinking water throughout the day, and you're drinking it throughout this video. All right. Before we even like get into anything that's moving here, the shading. Oh my gosh, that's so good, dude. The shading here is so nice to look at. I absolutely love the shading on this initial look at HATCHIYACK here. It really feels like there's light emanating from the ground and sort of, you know, going up towards HATCHIYACK. I think they sort of nailed that look for sure, how this area kind of looks, right? Let's see with that beginning section there. How does that actually look, right? When he is first coming off of the ground. Okay, so here we go. We have the... Okay, so interesting. It's more of a front angle in the anime. Okay, no, I guess that is, yeah, the same. I thought for some reason it was a little bit cocked to the side. It's interesting because it's almost like... it's like kind of cut off like right here almost, which is interesting. Whereas, you know, the whole shot has it all in, but of course that's because it's a vertical game. But this looks really good. I think the shading in Dokkan may even look better in this case, right? Obviously, this is such an old... like piece of media that it kind of makes sense that the colors are a little bit off, and of course it doesn't help in the original footage was put in. I mean, it's like not good quality to us nowadays, but of course like this was like the highest quality that they could make it back when this was originally released, of course. So of course to them it's not that quality, but today it's like, ooh, yikes, the pixels, bro. But this, I think, looks even better, honestly, with how the shading looks. And even when HATCHIYACK gets these bright lights around him, which is so nice to see as well, too. They even emulated the lights to a T with the shape of them, right? Like, that's such good attention to detail. I really like the coloring on HATCHIYACK as well, as the light sort of envelops him here, right? I think they do a good job on getting the lighting very good, and the light explodes and instantly changes with him, which is very nice too, right? I want to see, how does he grow in the anime, right? Okay, yeah, no, that is like super accurate. I wish it was a little bit more lined up right next to each other, like with the frame by frame. But yeah, the way that HATCHIYACK sort of just like explodes into this giant form is literally exactly like how it is in the anime, which is super cool. And you get a different angle of this giant. That's why I was getting confused, because I thought this was the giant transformation again, but this is actually just a different angle, which is interesting. Because obviously this, right, like this shot here is literally the same as this one. I think it may even be the same asset. That's what it looks like to me, honestly. It kind of looks like they just flipped it, right? Basically. But they did a really good job with this sequence. I really like this shot a lot. I think they did a good job with it for sure. And again, they do a good job with this one for sure, giving you that illusion of size, right? Like the scale of the characters, I think they do a pretty good job with here. Okay. So we now have the boy HATCHIYACK giving us the funny smirk, right, as the light sort of dissipates, right? I definitely like that a lot. We have the shot then cut to HATCHIYACK bringing his arms together. And I have to say, all of the movement in this is so fluid. Like, they saved the budget for this section. Because the way that HATCHIYACK moves his arms here, there is not a single problem here that I have with the movement, right? Especially in the full-time speed. It looks so fluid. It looks so good. I love the way that the different green parts of HATCHIYACK sort of light up here, and they sort of go down the line before you get this nice glow on him. Look at the lighting effects here, too. Look at how great these are with the light sort of like shimmering on him as you have this little glow. Oh, it's so good. It's amazing to me that this game is made entirely up of PNGs. It's so impressive to me that they're able to do this kind of stuff with stuff like this. But yeah, I love this sequence of his fingers sort of lighting up, right? With the different energies sort of coming into them. Really, really good stuff there for sure. I quite like that a lot. The lighting looks very, very good there. This looks super good with the green lights sort of shooting out of him, right? I think that that looks very, very nice. You have this nice green light sort of emanating off his chrome dome up at the top there, right? This is a great transition here too. And obviously you have the beam shoot out of him and engulf the screen in green before you get this cut to it actually hitting the enemy. And that shot of the explosion is so fluid, right? Like the beam itself looks really good. But then when you have it hit the actual stage, right, it sort of explodes off to the side and actually feels like it has the proper motion and momentum to it. And even the smoke following that same direction, right, with the electricity sort of lingering, they did a very good job on that for sure. Oh, it's so good. This shot here, first of all, Dokkan screenshots that go hard. is this right here. But this is like where all the budget went, right? Like this specific sequence right here. Oh my gosh, dude. Look at the shading on this. The shadows that are sort of flickering off of HATCHIYACK's body. The giant green chrome dome that my man is rocking with the sort of lights like twisting and fading inside of it, right? The nice glow effect on all of his fingers and on his arms. Obviously, you have these crazy green lights coming off of him as the energy is sort of gathering around and dissipating. It just looks so good. It's such a good shot, dude. That shot right there is just so raw. That is the only way that I could describe it. But yeah, then this is cool because this is like the same asset from before, like this one, basically. But at least they give you a little bit more of a dynamic thing here because it's not the exact same angle. Nonetheless, you know, you kind of feel like that this is probably a better way to capture the scene because even though he's kind of zoomed in for this, right, this gives you a little bit more perspective on the energy like coming in and how big it is that it's sort of like, you know, narrowing into him. And by the way, again, the lighting effects, oh man, they nailed it with how it looks so bright and then it sort of gets like this little like whitish tint as it's sort of concentrating in, and then it darkens a little bit as it's obviously concentrating into him, glowing a little bit as he sort of absorbs the energy within to him. So nice, dude. It looks so good, and the glow too. Oh man, they nailed it. And look at these effects of the beam. Speaking of oh my gosh, dude. So the electricity that sort of sparks here, like these little beams that sort of shoot out to sort of give you the little sign that something's about to come, the electricity right here, right? And then it feels like the key is actually swirling around as it's shooting out, and it actually feels like POV, you're getting hit by the key blast, which they absolutely nailed that sort of look. And the explosion effect there looks pretty good too. I want to see how that explosion looks in the actual anime, because it is a little bit weird with it just like there's nothing there, and then the explosion is just there. Let's see with the explosion here. Let's take a look. So yeah, obviously this, I would even say almost like low-key Dokkan's might even kind of look, yeah, Dokkan's looks way better for this shot. Hold on, bro. They popped off. The boys in the studio were cooking with that one. Holy moly, dude. That's crazy. Yeah, they nailed, look at this expression too. Oh my gosh, they did such a good job. Interesting they don't have that close-up shot. But this is basically how it looks like, except here. I mean, his arms aren't over his mouth, but interesting that they have that close-up shot of his dome as well. Yeah, I think even Dokkan looks even better than the original material. That's crazy, dude. Wow. Yeah, okay, so that does make sense with the explosion there. Obviously, there's an explosion in the back. They could have maybe done something a little bit more with that, I suppose, in the Dokkan version, right? Because it is just kind of like nothing there, and then it's there, which, I mean, I guess is how it is in the anime, but it feels like it has a little bit more impact in the anime version. I think it's done well enough, though, right? Like, that's obviously nitpicking quite a bit for sure. Okay. But yeah, and then obviously the Great Ape transformation is, I mean, nothing to write home about. This, I wouldn't even really count this as an animation. This is just what every Great Ape unit does when they de-transform, right? They're sort of just like asset fades into the white here. Okay, that is everything for our boy LR HATCHIYACK. Wow. I am glad that I took a look at these because I was originally like debating whether or not if I wanted to take a look at these actual animations, and I'm really glad that I did because this is so well done, right? Even though there are a couple of little things that are, you know, issues with this, I think that they're negligible next to how good everything in this animation looks, and especially that 18 key. Oh, they popped off. They did such a good job with this. It was also very nice having the source material on hand for this. I'm going to try and, if I can, maybe see if I can't do this going forward for the animation analysis videos, because I think it really helps. And not only does it help, it's also just nice being able to see it next to the source material and being able to know all these really cool things that Dokkan does to really keep it as, you know, correct and anime accurate, manga accurate, all that good stuff to the original material. But let me know what you think of this guy. I am definitely excited about this, man. I may have to go watch Eradicate the Saiyans, bro. Eradicate the Super Saiyans. I forget the exact name of the special, just to see this, bro, because it's like, oh man, hype, bro. I'm not even gonna lie. I never thought I would be that hype about a HATCHIYACK unit, but it's really cool. And I never thought that this man would get an LR either, so it's kind of crazy. And before we go, last thing I have to say, before obviously if you enjoyed, you know, don't forget to like and subscribe. Supporting the channel really helps. Is HATCHIYACK got a LR before Kid Buu. That's all I have to say. See you guys on the next one. Thank you so much for watching. Dokkan Assets out. Peace.